Assalamualaikum. Can you guys hear me okay?
عليكم السلام. Yes.
Okay. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Uh, you guys remember where we left off?
Yes. Um, I have,
Somewhere in the mutaqabilat, right?
Mhm. So I have the definition of mufassir. So we have ta'rif al-mufassir. I think we did a little bit of it.
Okay.
And then with Sheikh Tariq, we didn't do the book, but we went over kind of comparing different usul. So we went over some Maliki usul with his book and their breakdown of frameworks between like what they call their mutaqabilat, right? Like they have four categories, whereas we have eight, and how ours fit
Yep.
into.
Very cool. Very cool. Alhamdulillah. Okay, so mufassar. Can someone go ahead and read?
I think I read last time, but I can't remember.
Does anyone want to read?
Yeah, just need 1 second. Sorry.
It's page 78.
Okay. تعريف المفسر. وأما المفسر فهو ما ظهر المراد من اللفظ لبيان من قبل المتكلم بحيث لا يبقى معه احتمال التأويل والتخصيص.
Okay, so what we're saying is that the murad is expressed clearly and it's min qibal al-mutakallim. So it's explained by the speaker themselves, right? In a way that there is no yabqa, there does not remain any ihtimal or possibility of another interpretation. So with the wahid and nas, we said the meaning was clear. The only difference between the wahid and nas was that the nas itself was the purpose of the speech, right? So the wahid and nas are very similar, and everything that's going to be nas is also going to be the wahid. But the nas, the speech itself was for the purpose of the speech. Like what you took was from the purpose of the speech itself. But there's a possibility in both zahir and nas that there can be takhsis, there can be ta'wil, there can be maybe you took something as haqiqa, but it was majaz. Maybe, there's a variety of different possibilities of what can happen with zahir and nas, and there's room left for interpretation. With mufassar, we're saying the speaker says it in such a way that there's absolutely no room left for interpretation. It's so clear. Go ahead.
Sorry. مثاله في قوله تعالى فسجد الملائكة كلهم أجمعون. فاسم الملائكة ظاهر في العموم إلا أن احتمال التخصيص قائم، فانسد باب التخصيص بقوله كلهم، ثم بقي احتمال التفرقة في السجود فانسد
تفرقتي.
تفرقة في السجود فانسد باب التأويل بقوله أجمعون.
Exactly. So Allah says in the Quran, فَسَجَدَ الْمَلَائِكَةُ. And فَسَجَدَ الْمَلَائِكَةُ, when you say the angels prostrated, what do you think? Did some of the angels prostrate? All of the angels prostrate? Did two of the angels well, it can't be two, it has to be at least three. But you're wondering about angels, but by default, when you say the angels prostrated, what does it mean? It's am, right? And with am, it's going to include all of the angels. So all of the angels prostrated is what Allah's saying anyway. But just in case there's the ihtimal, there's the possibility of takhsis, that maybe a couple of them didn't, maybe some of them were, I don't know, out sick or whatever, like the angels weren't there. But to clarify that possibility, Allah says, kulluhum. So now we know that every single angel prostrated, and there's no possibility of takhsis, there's no possibility of ta'wil, there's no possibility of anything left. We know every single angel prostrated. But then there's still the possibility of tafriqa. There's still the possibility that they prostrated at separate times. So maybe three of them prostrated, then another two, maybe some prostrated today, some prostrated tomorrow. And then Allah shuts that door as well. It says in Sadd al-Bab, right? Like the door gets closed. So there's no possibility remaining because Allah says ajma'un, that all of them did it all together. So it's so mufassar, it's so clear, there's no possibility remaining that some angels didn't do it or that they did it separately. It's all of them did it, and all of them did it all together. Continue.
وفي الشرعيات إذا قال تزوجت فلانة شهرا بكذا فقوله تزوجت ظاهر في النكاح إلا أن احتمال المتعة قائم، فبقوله شهرا فسد المراد به، فقلنا هذا متعة وليس بنكاح.
So if I say زوجت فلانة, then I'm saying that I have married so and so person, right? But is it absolutely clear? Can you know 100% for sure that when I say زوجت, that I mean marriage? No, because there's the possibility that what I meant was that I did mut'ah, and we know that mut'ah is not permissible in Islam. It's at least for the Sunnis, we don't accept that. We only believe in long-term marriage. So if I say زوجت فلانة and then I add like shahran to it, then I am now taking that possibility that it was not marriage, it was mut'ah, and I'm making that the reality. Like, oh, actually, I only married her for 1 month, so I don't actually mean marriage. I don't mean nikah. I actually mean mut'ah. And so that makes it mufassar, because now there remains you have no lack of clarity. You know 100% for sure that I married her for 1 month. Therefore, it is mut'ah. So it becomes mufassar in that sense. Continue.
ولو قال لفلان علي 1000 من ثمن العبد أو من ثمن المتاع، فقوله علي 1000 نص في لزوم الألف إلا أن احتمال التفسير باق، فبقوله من ثمن العبد أو من ثمن المتاع بين المراد فيه، فيترجح المفسر على النص حتى لا يلزمه المال إلا عند قبض العبد أو المتاع. وقوله لفلان علي 1000 ظاهر في
That's another topic. Yeah, that's going to be a different topic. So if I say I owe you 1,000, then that statement is nas, right? Because the purpose of me saying I owe you 1,000 was to tell you I owe you 1,000. So it's zahir and it's nas, right? But if I don't tell you what it's for, then I'm just making a general statement with no specification, nothing. You're just saying I owe you 1,000. So no matter what, I will owe you 1,000, right? If I say I owe you 1,000, then I will owe you 1,000. However, if I make it mufassar by saying I owe you 1,000 min ثمن العبد أو ثمن المتاع, that I owe you 1,000 from the because I owe you the price of a slave, or I owe you the price of something that I've purchased from you. Let's say I buy your phone from you and I say I owe you 1,000 for the phone that you're selling me. Now at that point, I've connected those two things together and I've made it mufassar that the reason I owe you the 1,000, there's a reason. The reason is you're selling me the phone. So if you give me the phone, I will give you the 1,000. But if you decide not to give me the phone, then I won't give you the 1,000. The two things become tied together. Whereas by me just saying I owe you 1,000, I owe you 1,000 no matter what. But by saying I owe you 1,000 for the phone that you are selling me, now it's an exchange. So if the pub doesn't happen, if you don't give me the phone, I don't owe you the 1,000. Continue.
وقوله لفلان علي 1000 ظاهر في الإقرار نص في نقد البلد، فإذا قال من نقد بلد كذا يترجح المفسر على النص، فلا يلزمه نقد البلد بل نقد بلد كذا، وعلى هذا نظائره.
Okay, so if I say I owe you 1,000, by default is going to be the naqd of the balad is going to be by default I owe you $1,000. It's going to be by default I owe you $1,000 US. But if I say I owe you 1,000 Canadian dollars, now I have made it mufassar, and the Canadian dollars is what's going to be preferred over the currency of the country that you're in, right? Because now I've made it mufassar. Continue.
تعريف المحكم
Okay,
وأما
before we move on to muhkam, so any questions on mufassar? Do the examples make sense? Is it clear that the point of the mufassar is that the speaker themselves says it in such a clear manner that there's no other room left for interpretation? And you can see how when the speaker doesn't do that, then there's room for something else, or another possibility. Any questions on that?
discussion.
Okay, let's move on to muhkam then.
Um,
Sheikh, can I ask a question on Zahir and Nas?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you know if, like, when we were talking about this with Sheikh Tariq, the way he explained Zahir and Nas was that Zahir and Nas could only be interpreted in one way? Whereas when we were learning it, we talked about leaving some room. Like we said, clear, but it's not the purpose of the speech. We said, there's room for interpretation, right, or specification. So do you know, is that a different usuli framework or
I don't, I
positions?
don't remember, I don't remember from a Maliki perspective how it is. But from a Hanafi perspective, there's really only one way to interpret it, right? Because that's why it's called Zahir. The reason it's called Zahir is it has an apparent meaning, and that apparent meaning is clear, right? And so if it was unclear, like then it would be something like well, we'll get to it inshallah. It would be something like khafi or mushkil or mutashabih or mujmal. Or it would be something like mushtarak, which we've already discussed, or it'd be something like that. So the fact that it's zahir to begin with means it's a clear meaning. But just because it's a clear meaning doesn't mean there isn't a possibility of takhsis, taqyid, ta'wil, all of these different things. So there's a possibility of another meaning. Like if I say
Got it.
zawajtu fulanatan, right? What does it mean? It's clear. I married her. But there remains a possibility that I didn't actually marry her, but that I did mut'ah, right? So that's why we say, hey, there's a possibility there's another meaning. The mufassar removes that possibility and cuts it off. So
Mhm.
again, the example of fasajad al-malaika, it's clear. The angels prostrated. Did Allah have to say kulluhum ajma'un? No, I mean, that would be the default answer. But in case there was any doubt in your mind, or in case there's any possibility, Allah just eliminated it and cut it off. So that's what the Mufassal does. It just brings a higher level of clarity, a greater level of clarity. But again, the word zahir means apparent and clear. The word nas means even more clear than that. So don't think of it as like, hey, uh, it's interpretive. It's not really, but there's still room for interpretation.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, muhkam.
وأما المحكم فهو ما ازداد قوة على المفسر بحيث لا يجوز خلافه أصلا. مثاله في الكتاب إن الله بكل شيء عليم وإن الله لا يظلم الناس شيئا.
Okay. So it says here there's a quwwah in the muhkam that makes it even stronger than a mufassar. Well, the question becomes, if the mufassar is so clear, then why do you need another category on top of that? And the reason is the muhkam adds one feature that the mufassar doesn't have. With the mufassar, it's absolutely clear, but you can still take it back. You can abrogate it. It can change. So if I say, I owe you 1,000 for the phone, if you don't give me the phone, then I will not owe you 1,000 anymore, right? Muhkam is that thing. Once it's established, it can never change. So, inna Allah bi kulli shay'in alim. Allah will always, always, always have knowledge over everything. That's never going to change. So it was mufassar to begin with. Inna Allah bi kulli shay'in alim. Allah has knowledge over everything. But it's also muhkam in the sense that it can never be abrogated. Inna Allah la yadlimu nasa shay'a. Like Allah will never wrong anyone, even the slightest bit. That's never, ever, ever going to change. It'll never happen that Allah will ever wrong anyone in even the slightest way. And so these are things that are never going to change. Other examples of this, if I say to my wife, I divorce you, right? I cannot take that back. As in, I cannot completely erase and undo the divorce. Now, maybe it's talaq raj'i, and if it's talaq raj'i, I can take her back, but still one talaq has still taken place, right? And I can never make that number one go back to zero. If I say to my slave, I have freed you, then I can't take that back. That freedom takes place immediately, and there's nothing I can do about it. So there are things that we say that we can take back, like, hey, I'll see you tomorrow, right? And then I say, sorry, I won't see you tomorrow because I just realized I won't be coming to IOK or whatever. But there are things that I say, I divorce you, and it's too late. The words have been said, they cannot be undone. What's done is not undone. So whether it's Allah who's issuing a ruling which is never abrogated, whether it's the Prophet ﷺ sharing a ruling of Allah that can never be abrogated, or us making certain statements that are not undoable, that is what the muhkam is. Continue.
وفي الحكميات ما قلنا في الإقرار إنه لفلان علي 1000 من ثمن هذا العبد فإن هذا اللفظ محكم في لزومه بدلا عنه وعلى هذا نظائره.
Okay, sorry, my audio cut off. If you could repeat the في الحكميات.
وفي الحكميات ما قلنا في الإقرار إنه لفلان علي 1000 من ثمن العبد فإن هذا اللفظ محكم في لزومه بدلا عنه وعلى هذا نظائره.
Yeah, so just another example of a muhkam. Okay. Are we going to move on to the 4 words in terms of lack of clarity? Let's continue.
وحكم المفسر والمحكم لزوم العمل بهما لا محالة.
Okay, yeah. So finally, the hukm, we said the hukm and the wahid and the nas is that we're going to apply it. We're going to follow it with the possibility that there's a different interpretation. And with the mufassar and the muhkam, we're going to follow it absolutely, and there's no room for interpretation. Okay. Or further interpretation. Yeah. Continue.
الضاد هذه الأربعة ثم لهذه الأربعة أربعة أخرى تقابلها فضد الظاهر الخفي وضد النص المشكل وضد المفسر المجمل وضد المحكم المتشابه.
Okay, so these 4 that are clear, Zahir, Nas, Mufassir, and Muhkam, have 4, sometimes people say opposites. I actually like the word counterparts. I don't know what the book says there. But there's the 4 have 4 counterparts. So there's 4 when it comes to clarity, and there's 4 when it comes to lack of clarity. And they sort of like match up in a way against each other. So you have the khafi, which matches against the zahir. You have the mushkil, which matches against the nas. You have the mujmal, which sort of matches against the mufassar, and you have the mutashabi, which matches against the muhkam. Again, I prefer not to translate this into English because that just doesn't help too much. But I prefer to just keep them in Arabic. So let's continue with khafi.
تعريف الخفي فالخفي ما خفي المراد به بعارض لا من حيث الصيغة.
Okay, so the khafi is a word where it's not like you don't know the meaning of the word. So that's why it's saying it's not from a perspective of sigha. It's not like, oh my God, I don't know what this means grammatically. I don't understand this pattern. I don't understand what this word means. You know what the word means, and you know that it applies to a certain category of people. What you don't know is, does it apply in certain other cases? So let's say, here's how I think about the khafi. The khafi is, I draw a circle, okay? And what's inside the circle, I know the word means what's inside the circle. And I know that the word excludes what's outside the circle. Okay, so it includes what's inside, it excludes what's on the outside. But then imagine that the circle has a really wide border, like really thick border, and that border is gray. Okay? And the things that are in that gray, you're wondering, is that inside the circle or is that outside the circle? That's the khafi. Okay, I'm giving you a visualization. You're not going to find in the sharh or another book. This is just kind of how I think about it. Is You know what you know what that word means. So you know what's inside the circle. You also know a bunch of things that are outside the circle, but there's a gray area, which is the border of the circle, where you're wondering, is that is that included or is that not included? Okay, let's go through some examples.
مثاله في قوله تعالى: والسارق والسارقة فاقطعوا أيديهما، فإنه ظاهر في حق السارق وخفي في حق الطرار والنباش.
Okay, so the question becomes when Allah says وَالسَّارِقُ وَالسَّارِقَةُ فَقَطَعُوا أَيْدِيَهُمَا جَزَاءً بِمَا كَسَبَا نَكَالًا مِنَ اللَّهِ, that the male thief and the female thief cut off their hands, um, based on what they've done, what the crime that they've committed. We know what it means when it comes to the sariq. Okay, and we know what a thief is, right? There's certain conditions. Have you guys studied the fiqh of theft at all?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so do you know what the conditions are for passing the had on someone for stealing? Anything at all? Any conditions?
An eyewitness?
Is there a minimum amount that needs to be stolen? Like, what if I just steal like a dollar from someone? Does my hand have to get cut off?
No, because it can't be petty theft, right? But I don't know how they define it.
Yeah, so there's a minimum amount. The Hanafi say it has to be 10 dirhams. And then there's what other conditions? One of the conditions is that you can't just you have to protect, you have to try and secure the item. Otherwise, it doesn't count as thievery. So if I just take my laptop and I put it out in front of my door on the porch and I go to sleep and somebody steals my laptop, that doesn't count as sariqah. Okay, it doesn't count as theft because I did not protect it. So it has to be minimum amount. It has to be something that's protected by the owner. There's a number of other conditions as well, but this is not a fiqh class, so we don't have to go into those details. But regardless, we know what theft is. We have certain conditions around it, so we know what's inside the circle. The thing we're working to figure out is the tarar and the nabash. Are they also sadiq or not? Do we apply the had of stealing to the tarar and do we apply it to the nabash? So what's a tarar and what's a nabash? The tarar is a pickpocket. Okay, it's someone who like comes up to you and steals money, like I don't know, from your wallet or your pocket or something like that. And then nabash is what would be called a grave robber or I don't know, if you want to make it fun, you can call it a tomb raider. It's someone who goes and steals shrouds from the grave. Shrouds are those clothes that we wrap the dead in. And so someone goes to the grave and steals the shroud off a dead body. So the question becomes, do they count as theft? Do they not count as theft? And so the scholars think about this. And the way that you solve a khafi, did we see this already in the definition? Did the definition talk about talab or no? If you can read the definition again. تعريف الخفي.
Yeah. فالخفي ما خفي المراد به بعارض لا من حيث الصيغة.
Okay, that's it, right? So it didn't talk about how we resolve the khafi. So what we need to do in order to resolve the khafi is we need to do some research. The scholar needs to sit down, analyze, study, look at all the evidences, combine it together, think about it, and figure out how to resolve this khafa. You need to resolve this obscurity or ambiguity. And so what you do is you think about it, and they conclude that, you know what, a tarar is someone who came, like the person, the victim, had their money secured, right? And like stealing is considered like when you steal without even any aggression. And so if someone's coming in it aggressively, like they're coming in and taking your pocket or something like that, that's even worse than the sadiq. So the same had that applies to the sadiq is going to apply to the tarar. But when you look at the Nabash, then there's a difference of opinion between the Hanafis and the Shafi'is. The Hanafis say, uh, you know, the first of all, we said one of the conditions was that the owner has to be protecting their asset, right? And we said that if you look at the shroud, it's on the dead body. Well, if you're dead, you can't even possess property. So how are they going to be protecting their assets? That's not nobody's protecting it. And you can't say that like the relatives are responsible because the relatives are not in the graveyard. According to the Hanafis, the asset's not being protected, and therefore this is not going to count as theft. And so the Nabash is not going to fall into the ruling. It's not going to get the same punishment that the Sadiq would get. The Shafi'is, they say that, you know what, if like the tomb is protected and covered and things like that, then it would be considered Sadiqah because the tomb was secure. But if it's not secure, then it would not be considered Sadiqah. Uh, and also, if the graveyard is near people who have houses near the graveyard, then you could say, yeah, it's secure. But if it's out in the middle of the desert, then it would not be considered secure. So the Shafis have a different opinion, but the Hanafis basically say that the Nabash is not going to have the had punishment that the Sadiq did. I'm going to switch over to the other computer.
Any questions on the Nabash or the Talaq? Okay, keep moving.
وكذلك قوله تعالى الزانية والزاني ظاهر في حق الزاني خفي في حق اللوطي.
Yeah, so there's we know for the Zani and the Zania, we know what the punishment is. It's 100 lashes. And again, we know what a Zani and a Zania are, right? So if you were to draw a circle and I asked you, like, is this person a Zani? You would be like, no. And I would ask you, this person a Zani? You would say yes, right? So you know the adulterer, the fornicator, you know how to put them in a circle, you know which ones are out of the circle. The question becomes, what if somebody is not doing pure zina between a man and a woman, but they're doing that act between a man and a man? Okay, sorry to get all graphic, but this is what the book is talking about, right? So when it's a man and a man, we understand it's not exactly the same as zina. Like the act is a little bit different. So the question becomes, does it count as zina or does it not count as zina? Right? Any thoughts on that?
Wouldn't it technically like be worse in the sense of the reason zina is forbidden, or one of the actions, right, that is forbidden is the actual action, but that's between a man and a woman. So that if that occurs between a man and a man, that still falls in the category, but then it also is a second category, which is different.
It falls in the second category, but the question is, does it fall in the first category or not? Because it's not exactly the same action. So the Imam Abu Hanifa basically says it's not zina, whereas Imam Shafi'i says it is zina. So you see how are you starting to understand the concept of khafi here, where you know where it applies, you know where it doesn't apply for many things, but then there's like these gray areas, like, wait, is that zina or is that not zina? Is that sadaqah, is that not sadaqah? So that's really what the issue is. Next one.
ولو حلف لا يأكل فاكهة كان ظاهرا فيما يتفكه به خفيا في حق العنب والرمان.
Okay, so what does the word fakiha mean for us?
Fruits.
Yeah, for us it means fruits. But culturally, it had a slightly different meaning for the people, at least at Imam Shashi's time. I don't know how far back this goes. but they would consider fruits, they would divide fruits into two categories. So if I say لا آكل فاكهة, I'm not going to eat fruit, it depends on which of the two categories I'm talking about. There's a category of fruits that were considered to be like entire meals, like grapes and pomegranates were considered to be so nourishing that they were like, if I have grapes and pomegranates, I've eaten the whole meal. Whereas other types of fruits were considered to be snacks and like just for enjoyment, that you're not eating because you're hungry, but you're just kind of like eating because you want to have some snack to eat, something like that. So if somebody says لا أكل فاكهة, then it's ظاهر that I'm not going to eat other types of fruits, but it's khafi in does it include grapes or pomegranates or not? And that's going to be based on the culture that you bring. Okay, so this example might be hard for us to empathize with, but it's something definitely that existed in Imam Shashi's time. Okay, continue.
وجوب الطلب أو وحكم الخفي وجوب الطلب حتى يزول عنه الخفاء.
Yeah, so what we're saying is for the khafi, to remove the khafanas, you have to just do ijtihad. So you're going to do research, thinking. I already talked about this. Is to remove the khafa. There, you just have to like spend time, and the khafa will be removed. Again, the answer that you come to is going to be what? It's probabilistic. It's one. It seems like, yeah, this seems like the right answer, but there's a possibility you're wrong, right? Next one.
تعريف المشكل وحكمه. وأما المشكل فهو ما ازداد خفاء على الخفي، كأنه بعدما خفي على السامع حقيقته دخل في إشكاله وأمثاله، حتى لا ينال المراد إلا بالطلب ثم بالتأمل حتى يتميز عن أمثاله.
Okay, so the mushkil has more more obscurity than the khafi. So I say, وَأَمَّا الْمُشْكِلُ فَهُوَ مَا ازْدَادَ خَفَاءً عَلَى الْخَفِيِّ. It has more khafa than the khafi. Okay, so that's not completely clear, but you know, whereas in the khafi, I said you draw a circle and then you look at what's inside out, so it's gray border you don't understand. The mushkil is harder than that. The way that I imagine and visualize a mushkil is there's a circle and another circle and another one and another one and another one, and you have all these non-overlapping circles. And for each one, you're trying to figure out, is this included or is it not? Is this included or is it not? Is this included or is it not? So it's like, to begin with, you don't even have like, oh, I know this is included and these aren't. For every single one, you're like, is it included? Is it not? Is it included? Is it not? Is it included? Is it not? Okay, that's how you're kind of looking at it. The word ashkala yushkilu means that something has fallen into the shakal of something else. Okay, so ashkala yushkilu itself has this implication that if I take like, I don't know, if I take my pen and I take a bucket of pens and I throw my pen in there, now I'm like, oh no, which one's mine, right? It just became mushkil because it fell into the shakal of all these other things. I'm like, oh man, all of this looks very similar. Which one is my pen? So that's what we're dealing with in a mushkil situation, is you're trying to figure out what's going on. Okay, continue.
ونظيره في الأحكام حلف لا
Oh, by the way,
يأتدم.
sorry. حتى لا ينال المراد إلا بالطلب ثم بالتأمل حتى يتميز عن أمثاله. The answer is, again, you have to do تأمل, you have to do طلب. You're doing like research, you're trying to figure it out and figure out what the answer for the mushkil is. Yeah, sorry, continue.
ونظيره في الأحكام حلف لا يأتدم، فإنه ظاهر في الخل والدبس، فإنما هو مشكل في اللحم والبيض والجبن حتى يطلب في معنى الإيتدام، ثم يتأمل أن ذلك المعنى هل يوجد في اللحم والبيض والجبن أم لا.
Okay, so someone makes a promise that they're not going to do itidam. They said, لو حلف لا يأتدم. They're not going to do itidam. So itidam, I don't know a good way to translate it, but itidam is when you're applying it's things like when you're throwing like when you're eating food and you add like ketchup or spice or salt, or it's like you're adding things to your food, okay? And so someone said they're not going to do itidam. So now we're trying to figure out what does that mean. So this is specifically in the context of applying it to their bread, okay? So it's wahid when it comes to vinegar and the juice of dates, but the question becomes, does it apply to meat? Does it apply to eggs? Does it apply to cheese? And so what we got to do is figure out, like, what does itidam mean? That's the mushkil part. What does it apply to? What does it apply? What does itidam really mean? And so you have to do ta'ammul, you have to do talab, you have to do all this stuff. And at the end, what the scholars have figured out is itidam means that when you have your bread, so it was mushkil to begin with, but then they spent effort and they found out, or they discovered, or they came to the conclusion, I shouldn't say discovered, they came to the conclusion that if it's something that soaks into the bread, that's itidam. But if it's something that doesn't soak into the bread, that's not itidam. So if I put ketchup on my bread, is that itidam or not?
Yes, because if you leave it for long enough, it'll soak in.
Well, you don't even have to leave it for long, right? It immediately starts seeping into it. How about olive oil?
Yes.
Yes. How about roast beef?
That's
No.
tricky. Not entirely dry.
It's very dry, so it's not, right? How about a boiled egg?
Oh,
No. Okay. How about cheese?
Depends on the type of cheese.
Depends on the type of cheese, right? So if it's sliced Kraft cheese and I put it on the bread, it's not going to mix in. But then if I throw it in the microwave and it melts, yes, right? So anyway, that's the conclusion we've come to, is if it gets absorbed and soaked in, then it's going to count. Otherwise, it's not going to count.
Sheikh, is there any overlap between this and khafi in the sense of, like, if we're thinking about this as condiments, like in an American sense, we think of that as, right, ketchup, mustard, that type of stuff. Like we don't consider like cheese, eggs, stuff a condiment. So like
That's
in
why
one,
condiment's not the best translation.
so it's not actually a condiment. Okay.
Yeah, I don't.
It's just something that's applied on top.
Yeah.
Okay.
Think of it as like you're making a sandwich. If we're going to try and like, this is not exactly right, but the idea is you're having bread with something. Is that something going to count as itidam or not? That's the problem we're trying to resolve. So usually it'd be like a sandwich, right? If you eat bread with something, you can probably also put that something on the bread. You can make it into a sandwich. Okay. That's mushkil. Mushkil is very mushkil to explain, honestly, but people get confused between khafi and mushkil. That's why I tried to take you through some visual analogies. I'm hoping that was helpful because for me, myself, I spent a lot of time trying to think about this and try and differentiate between the two. It's not completely easy. Okay, next one.
تعريف المجمل ثم فوق المشكل المجمل وهو ما احتمل وجوها فصار بحال لا يوقف على المراد إلا ببيان من قبل المتكلم.
Okay. So mushkil is even higher than, sorry, the mujmal is even more, it's even above the mushkil, to the point that you will not be able to identify its meaning إلا ببيان من قبل المتكلم, except for by the speaker themselves. It's so unclear. Remember, with khafi and mushkil, what did we have to do? The scholar had to sit there and do ijtihad to figure out the answer, with the possibility of being wrong. Mujmal, you can't just sit there and figure it out. There's nothing you can do to figure it out. The speaker either told you or they didn't tell you. If they didn't tell you, too bad, right? So examples of words that are mujmal, Allah says in the Quran, aqim salah. If you didn't have the Prophet ﷺ doing bayan of that, showing you what salah means, and all you had was the Quran, would you know how to pray? Would you even know what salah means? Would you know salah means prayer? What does salah mean?
set of actions that starts with the takbirah and ends with taslim.
That's a technical definition that you learn because somebody taught you fiqh, right? And it's coming from like even understanding what that means because the Prophet ﷺ explained it. But before the Prophet ﷺ explaining what salah means, if you just all you had was the Quran, no other reference, and you read the Quran and Allah says, Aqimis salah. What have you understood from that?
Not much.
Say that again?
Not much.
Not much. You're like, it's some sort of like connecting, linking, something like that. What does it mean? Allah says, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِن قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. So Allah says, do sawm, do siyam. What does it mean? To abstain. Do you know what to do? No. Allah says, give zakat. But like, what's zakat? Zakat means to purify. How do I give purification? You don't know that you have to have nisab and it has to be there for hawl for 355 days. And then, it's 2.5% that are given to these 8 categories. And all. You don't know that stuff. All you know is Allah said, give zakat. So all of these words are mujmal because the words themselves didn't have a meaning until the Prophet ﷺ did bayan of these words. And he said, by the way, prayer means like you said, the technical definition, you stand up and you start, you say Allahu Akbar, you start with takbir and with taslim, and you do this sajda and ruku, and you read Quran, all this stuff, right? Fasting means you wake up before sunrise and, before the Fajr time, and you eat, and then, you don't eat, and you don't engage in relations and all this stuff until sunset. And here's what it means. So words like salah, zakah, siyam, or even the riba. What is riba? Right? Allah says, وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَأْكُلُوا الرِّبَا. Don't consume riba. Like, oh, what do we do? What's riba? I don't know what riba is. Until the Prophet ﷺ explains to us what riba is, riba al-nasi'a, riba al-fadl, all of that stuff. Right? So these words were all mujmal by default. But then the speaker, or in this case, the Prophet ﷺ, gave us bayan, gave us clarification. Then we knew what these things meant. Okay? Continue.
ونظيره في الشرعيات قوله تعالى وحرم الربا فإن المفهوم من الربا هو الزيادة مطلقة وهي غير مرادة بل المراد الزيادة الخالية عن العوض في البيع المقدرات المتجانسة واللفظ لا دلالة له على هذا فلا ينال المراد بالتأمل.
Okay. So this is in the Quran, وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا فَإِنَّ الْمَفْهُومَ مِنَ الرِّبَا هُوَ الزِّيَادَةُ مُطْلَقًا. So riba means what? Riba means growth, right? It means an increase in something, but it's any type of increase. The word riba linguistically just means increase. It could be profit, it could be interest, right? It could be a halal type of profit, it could be haram type of profit. But Allah says, وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا. So if you just read that, then the word is mujmal, you're thinking, I'm not allowed to make a profit at all. Right? There's no types of profit that's acceptable. But then, وَهِيَ غَيْرُ مُرَادَةٍ, that's not the meaning. بل المراد الزيادة الخالية عن العوض في بيع المقدرات المتجانسة. So this, I don't know why this book specifically talks about the riba al-fadl, and it says, when you have, it's referring to the hadith of الذهب بالذهب والفضة بالفضة, and it's talking about gold and silver and wheat and barley and salt and dates and all of that, right? So yeah, but riba is also an increase on a loan. Okay, so riba is more than that. But the point being that you don't know what the riba means, you just think it means any type of profit until it becomes clear to you through the hadith and through the sunnah of Rasulullah that riba is certain types of profits, like basically when you're exchanging certain goods for other types of goods, which is riba al-fadl, and then when you're loaning money out with an increase, which is riba of nasi'a, and then you have profits, and the profits are on selling things are allowed, no problem. Okay, so again, it was a mujmal term until it was explained. Continue.
تعريف المتشابه ثم فوق المجمل في الخفاء المتشابه. مثال المتشابه الحروف المقطعات في أوائل السور.
Okay, so then the author says above the mujmal in terms of khafanas is the mutashabih, and So if the mujmal was something that the speaker needed to explain, then what's the difference between the mujmal and the mutashabih? Like how can something be even more unclear than that?
There's no explanation for حروف مقطعات.
Yes, no explanation was provided. So the difference between the mujmal and the mutashabih, the way I think about it, is the mujmal, maybe the speaker explained it. Mutashabih, there just isn't a way to do it. So, for example, what are the things that are mutashabih? I am of the opinion that mutashabih, mutashabih is a broad category, but I'm of the opinion that mutashabih includes all of those things where you understand what the word means in the Quran, for example, but you do not fully comprehend what the word is referring to. So words inside sentences, words in languages have meaning. Words indicate to you something. If I say banana, it's not just like the pronunciation B-A-N-A-N-A or like writing of the word or anything like that. The word banana is referring to a fruit. That fruit has a specific, generally color associated with that, specific smell associated with it, a taste associated with it. So when I say banana to you, my point is to refer to the fruit, right? I'm not just saying the word banana. When I say, hey, I ate a banana today, like I want you to think about that fruit, the taste of the fruit, the nutrition of the fruit, whatever it might be, but I'm referring to the fruit. So all of the words in a sentence, all of the words in the Quran, for example, have some sort of an external reference that you're talking about. In this case, a specific type of fruit. So whenever the Quran talks about Jannah or Jahannam as an example, those are external references that we can't completely understand. When Allah says there's going to be grapes and pomegranates in Jannah, we really can't even begin to understand what those grapes and pomegranates in Jannah taste like. Right? When Allah says Jahannam is going to be like XYZ, whatever, we can't even begin to comprehend. I mean, we can begin to comprehend, but like we can't go beyond the beginning to really understand what Jahannam is like. When Allah says He has hands or a face or anything like that, again, we don't comprehend and we don't understand the full reality of that. So we sort of know what it means, but then we don't really understand beyond that what it means. So all of those things, according to my opinion, would be mutashabih, that we don't actually know. We won't know until we experience it. We won't know what it means until we see Allah. We won't know what it means until we, inshallah, may Allah take us there, we see Jannah, right? So those things are all mutashabih, is that we're not going to know them. Whereas mujmal was explained to us, the mutashabih we're not going to have that level of clarity in this life. Okay, continue.
وحكم المجمل والمتشابه اعتقاد حقية المراد به حتى يأتي البيان.
Yeah, so with both mujmal and mutashabih, we believe in what's being said until we get the absolute clarification for what they actually mean. In the mujmal, we get it. In the mutashabih, we will experience some of it later in our life, inshallah. Any questions on anything related to the mutaqabilat? Okay. So those were the mutaqabilat. Now, why did we study the mutaqabilat? What was the value? What's the point? How does it help us?
Isn't it the same as why we studied Zahir Nas Muhkam Mufassir, in the sense that like it
My
provides,
question is about all of them. Why did we study those, and why did we study these 8 categories? What's the point?
like for us, it gives us a framework as to knowing whether something truly is like qat'i or lanni or speculative, or how you interpret things.
Yeah, that's a fair answer, I think, is to help us evaluate if something's mufassar, it's qat'i, right? If something is muhkam, it's qat'i. Whereas when it's Allah or nas, it's wanni. But also we saw several examples of if we had two seemingly contradictory pieces of evidence, we prefer the nas over the zahir.
Yes.
So it breaks those ties. Like we have one hadith saying one thing, we have another hadith saying another thing. Like, wow, it appears to be a contradiction. But hey, this hadith was nas on this issue, this other one was zahir on the issue. So we're gonna, assuming they're two hadith of equal value, right? They're both authentic, they're both, let's take all those other factors out of the equation, then you're preferring one over the other. So that's the idea here. And then with things like mujmal, you need to go find the answer from the speaker somewhere else. And with khafi and mushkil, you have to do some research. So it helps you kind of figure out what to do from those perspectives. Okay. So now we're going to move on to a chapter on what is it? Faslun fi yutraku, something.
Mhm.
Yeah, continue what's the name of the chapter?
فصل فيما يترك به حقائق الألفاظ.
Okay, so we're going to talk about, this is a chapter on when do we abandon or discard or like ignore the haqiqah of the word. So it could be that we abandon the haqiqah and we go to the majaz, or it could be that we abandon the haqiqah and I'll teach you something new, we go to that. Okay. Now, haqiqah and majaz were discussed a few chapters ago. So it's kind of odd that we're coming back to haqiqah and majaz. The best explanation I can provide is that we just went through the chapter on trying to clear things up. This is clear, this is unclear. And so now we're coming back and saying, how do we clarify, is it haqiqah or is it majaz? So that's why this chapter comes here, is to try and clear that up. When do we go with the haqiqah meaning? And when do we go with the majaz meaning? Okay. So we've talked about the fact that generally speaking, words are to be taken in their literal meaning. They're to be taken in their haqiqah meaning. And according to the Hanafis, the haqiqah will always get preference over the majaz if both the haqiqah and the majaz are in use, like both of them are, the words are used. Even if majaz is in use, the haqiqah is always going to be given preference. But every once in a while, we're going to abandon the haqiqah. Sometimes we're going to abandon the haqiqah completely, and sometimes we're going to abandon the haqiqah partially. So the entire purpose of this chapter is to give us the 5 reasons or the 5 different conditions under which we're going to abandon the haqiqah, either entirely or partially. And those 5 conditions are, and if you want to write them down, the first one is called dalalatul urf, which is due to some customary reason. The second one is called dalalatul kalam, which is something in the speech or the text or whatever it is you're looking at. It's something in there itself, like the speech itself tells you, it gives you an idea that you have to abandon the haqiqah. Then there's dalalatul siyaq, which is the context in which the speech was uttered or the text was presented. So the siyaq tells you, hey, you need to abandon haqiqah, go to the majaz. And then there's dalalatun min qibali al-mutakallim, which is that it's not the speech, it's not the context, it's the speaker. Because you know something about the speaker, the speech has to be interpreted in a way that you're abandoning the haqiqah and going to something else. And then the last one is dalalatu mahalli al-kalam. That is the object of the speech, the thing that you're talking about. That tells you need to abandon the haqiqah. So again, dalalatul urf, custom, dalalatul kalam, the speech itself, dalalatul siyaq, which is the context, dalalatun min qibali al-mutakallim, which is the speaker, or dalalatu mahalli al-kalam, the object of the speech. Okay. It's probably a good time to take a 10-minute break. So let's resume at 8:45, inshallah. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Okay, let's continue with the reading.
بسم الله. أنواع ما يترك به الحقيقة. وما يترك به حقيقة اللفظ 5 أنواع، أحدها دلالة العرف، وذلك لأن ثبوت الأحكام بالألفاظ إنما كان لدلالة اللفظ على المعنى المراد للمتكلم، فإذا كان المعنى متعارفا بين الناس كان ذلك المعنى المتعارف دليلا على أنه هو المراد به ظاهرا، فيرتب عليه الحكم.
Okay, so we said أنواع ما يترك به الحقيقة. What are the types? What are the different categories where you abandon the حقيقة? وما يترك به حقيقة اللفظ 5 أنواع. There's 5 types. We already talked about what the 5 were. أحدهما, the first one is دلالة العرف. وذلك لأن ثبوت الأحكام بالألفاظ إنما كان لدلالة اللفظ على المعنى المراد للمتكلم. Why? Because the whole point of words is to give meaning, depending on how people want to use them. We don't actually care what the coined meaning of the word is. What we're trying to figure out is what is the intended meaning of the word. دلالة اللفظ على المعنى المراد للمتكلم. What is the متكلم? What does the متكلم intend by it? And so if they're using particular words, and those words have like if what's فإذا كان المعنى متعارفا بين الناس كان ذلك المعنى متعارف دليلا على أنه هو المراد به ظاهرا. That if you have a meaning that is متعارف, that is like well known amongst the people, كان ذلك المعنى المتعارف دليلا, that becomes the دليل على أنه هو المراد به ظاهرا. That's the apparent meaning. If words are used in a particular meaning all the time amongst the people, then that's what the default ظاهر meaning is going to be, right? We don't care what the original meaning was or whatever else. We just care about the fact that that's what the intended meaning probably is what the people generally understand. فيرتب عليه الحكم. So then the حكم is going to be based on that.
مثاله حلف لا يشتري رأسا فهو على ما تعارفه الناس فلا يحنث برأس العصفور والحمام.
Okay, pause. So somebody vows they're not going to buy a head. Then it will be, we said حلف لا يشتري رأسا, they're not going to buy a head. فهو على ما تعارفه الناس. So that's going to be based on what the people understand, what the people know is buying a head. So you look at the culture of the society or the common usage of what does it mean that I'm not going to buy a head. And so in this particular culture that we're talking about, the way they would think about heads is you eat an animal, right? And back in the day when you ate animals, you would eat all parts of the animals. In fact, in many parts of the world, it's like that. If you go to Pakistan, for example, you can eat the kidney, the heart, the brain, every part of the animal is available for you to eat. And by the way, there's a lot of nutritious value in those parts that you don't find in other parts of the body of the animal. But anyway, when you buy those parts, like you either go to the store and you're like, hey, give me some cow. Okay. And when you buy cow meat is usually purchased as, hey, would you like the shoulder? Would you like the feet? Would you like the head? Would you like the heart? Would you like the kidney? Would you like all of these different parts? Okay. That's how cow meat is sold. But when you buy a bird, like let's say you're buying, here we're talking about usfur and hammam, so we're talking about sparrows and pigeons. You don't say, I want to buy the feet of a bird or the head of a bird or the body of a bird or the wing of a bird. You just say, I would like to buy a bird. Okay, that's how it's sold. You buy a bird. But you don't usually go and say, I'd like to buy a cow. You buy pieces of a cow. So when someone says, I'm not going to buy a head, that means that they're not going to buy like a cow head or a goat head or something like that, where they're sold individually as heads. But if they go and they buy fish or they buy a sparrow or a pigeon or something like that, and it happens to have a head on it, that's not going to be breaking the oath because they didn't buy a head, they bought a body which happened to have a head attached to it. So the default meaning of that, like I make an oath that I'm not going to buy a head in that type of society because of the societal norms would mean I'm not going to buy a standalone head of a cow, etc. Okay, not that I got a head as a part of a pigeon. Okay, so that's why I say so فلا يحنث برأس العصفور والحمام. Okay, ولو حلف, continue.
ولو حلف لا يأكل بيضا كان ذلك على المتعارف فلا يحنث بتناول بيض العصفور والحمام.
Same thing. So if somebody makes a promise, I'm not going to eat eggs, right? كان ذلك على المتعارف. It's going to be based on what the custom is. فلا يحنث بتناول بيض العصفور والحمام. So again, pigeon egg and sparrow eggs aren't going to count because people don't usually go out and buy pigeon and sparrow eggs and eat them. So it would mean things like chicken eggs because that's what the norm is. Okay, so again, you kind of go by what the customary norm is. Now we're going to learn a new concept called al-haqiqatu al-qasiratu. Now keep in mind, this is custom, right? So it can change in our time. In our time, it might mean something else. But let's learn this concept of al-haqiqatu al-qasira. What's a haqiqa qasira? وبهذا
وبهذا ظهر أن ترك الحقيقة لا يوجب المصير إلى المجاز بل جاز أن يثبت به الحقيقة القاصرة ومثاله تقييد العام بالبعض.
Okay, so based on these examples we just went through, ظهر, it became apparent to us أن ترك الحقيقة لا يوجب المصير إلى المجاز. Just because you're abandoning the haqiqa doesn't mean that you're going straight to the majaz. So sometimes when we say it's not, we don't mean the haqiqa meaning, we mean the majaz meaning. Sometimes what we're saying is we don't mean the haqiqa meaning. What we instead mean is the haqiqa qasira meaning. What's the difference between haqiqa and haqiqa qasira? Haqiqa qasira is when you've taken, remember we said aam is like all of the things, and then if you do takhsis of it, you're selecting some things. So haqiqa qasira is sort of like that. جاز أن يثبت به الحقيقة القاصرة ومثاله تقييد العام بالبعض. So you took something that was aam and you removed some things from it, or you pulled, or you selected some things from it. So if I said in the example I said when someone says they're not going to buy a head, it means cow head and goat head, but it doesn't mean fish head and sparrow head and pigeon head, right? So certain things got excluded, certain things got included. So it was not the entire haqiqa, it's not the entire set, it's not am, but some takhsis was done. So some things were selected and others were excluded. Similarly, when I said eggs, I said chicken eggs are included, but other types of eggs like pigeon and sparrow eggs are not included. So it's a smaller set of what was the original haqiqa. You're abandoning the haqiqa, which would have been all of those things, and you're going to haqiqa qasira, which is a subset of those things. Any questions on that concept? Okay, continue.
مثال آخر لدلالة العرف وكذلك لو نذر حجا أو مشيا إلى بيت الله تعالى وأن يضرب بثوبه حطيم الكعبة يلزمه الحج بأفعال معلومة لوجود العرف.
Okay, so وكذلك لو نذر, someone makes a vow or an oath, حجا, that I'm going to make hajj. Okay, what does the word hajj mean?
The linguistic meaning?
Linguistic meaning, yeah. I think the technical meaning is easy. It's that thing that comes around once a year that Muslims have to do once in their lifetime, and they have to do dot 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 dot. Right? What's the linguistic meaning? It means to intend to do something. More specifically, like oftentimes it means to intend to set out on a journey, to go on a journey of some sort. Right? So you can see how the technical meaning is related to the linguistic meaning. But what we're saying here is if someone says, "Lo nazara hajjan," hey, I'm going to do hajj. And then somebody's like, "Hey, you didn't do hajj. What's going on?" They're like, "Oh, I meant I'm going to go, to the city next door, to the city next to us." No, when you say I'm going to go for hajj, what does that mean to people? It doesn't mean anymore, right? Like it's not the linguistic definition. When you say I'm going to go for hajj, then people take that to mean that I'm actually going to go for the pilgrimage, the major pilgrimage, right? Or you say, I'm going to walk to the house of Allah. That meaning, I mean, again, this may not make sense to us in our custom in our time, but in their custom, their time, when someone said, I'm going to walk to the house of Allah, it meant I'm going to do hajj. Okay? Or they say, وَأَنْ يَضْرِبَ بِثَوْبِهِ حَطِيمَ الْكَعْبَةِ. What's the hatim? What's the hatim of the Kaaba?
The portion on the outside that used to be a part of the Kaaba.
Yeah, it's that little semicircle area outside the cube, which used to be part of the Kaaba, right? So if you make a vow that you're going to rub your clothes on the hatim of the Kaaba, again, these are just weird ways that people back in the day, I guess, would say, I'm going to go for Hajj. I'm going to have my thobe, you know, I'm going to rub my thobe on the hatim of the Kaaba. It means, or it meant to do Hajj. So if you make one of these vows, like I'm going to go I'm going to do this Hajj, I'm going to Hajj, or I'm going to walk to the house of Allah, or I'm going to rub my thobe on the hatim, then you've just made a vow to do Hajj. So now if I walk to the Kaaba and just like do an Umrah and come back, I haven't fulfilled my vow. If I walk to the Kaaba and I just, do some trading and selling and buying and commerce and whatever, and I come back, it's not going to count, because even though I literally said I'm going to walk to the house of Allah, the customary meaning was I'm going to go for Hajj. So if I took my clothes off and I gave them to somebody and I said, go rub the walls of the Kaaba, go rub the hatim with my clothes, then come back, it's not going to count. So all of these things are not going to count, because it's going to mean Hajj بأفعال معلومة لوجود العرف, because that's what the customary meaning of these things is to perform Hajj. Okay, now again, this is not how we talk in our custom, so it might seem a little bit foreign, but he's describing their custom.
Shay, can you explain how do we reconcile what we talked about like earlier at the beginning of class, where we said the Hanafi usul, when it comes to like taking a vow, is more literal, right? Like you should say what you mean by it, but now we're saying we do take into account some of the urf and customary usages.
Not just vows, anything that we say, the default is we're going to go with the haqiqah. Default is we're going with haqiqah. This chapter is, when do we not go with the haqiqah? So when we don't go with the haqiqah is when customarily everybody has developed a certain vocabulary that when you say something, it means that, it means that, right? So you're not going to pick the haqiqah, because this has now become the common customary term, is to say, and when I say this thing, it means Hajj. Okay, well then that thing is going to mean Hajj.
That makes sense. I'm just trying to remember. I don't remember the specific example, but was it because when we said that when there's ambiguity, like it could be a customary meaning, but it could also be a literal meaning, and we don't know which of the two, then you go with the haqiqah?
Yeah, that's correct. However, what we go with is, we go with the muta'araf. So we're talking about amongst the people, if it has a haqiqah and a majaz meaning, then we're going to prefer the haqiqah over the majaz, unless the majaz has become so muta'araf, the usage has become to the point where that's now become like, it's kind of gone over that 50% point, where like, well, when you say this, it really now just means the majazi meaning. So that's the idea here. Okay. So again, we took away the literal meaning and we started applying the majaz in this case. So let's move on to the next one, dalalatul kalam.
Sheikh, is it necessary that these words have a majaz meaning as well?
Please explain
Like,
the question. Yeah.
in the example, لا يأكل بيضا, it's literal, right?
Yeah, it's literal. But the la yakulu baydan, what we said was, what's going to apply based on the urf is not majaz, but we're going to go to the haqiqa qasira. So we're not going to say it means, by default, what does it mean? If I say I'm not going to eat eggs, it means I'm not going to eat any type of eggs, right? But because of the custom, in our custom, if I say eggs, it only means like this type of egg, but it doesn't mean that type of egg. The custom is going to take preference. And so you go to the haqiqa qasira, which is, haqiqa would have been all types of eggs. Haqiqa qasira is only some types of eggs. So you didn't go to majaz, but you went to haqiqa qasira. But again, you abandoned the haqiqa, because by default, you would have thought all of the eggs would have been included. But customarily, they aren't. And so the reason the example may not be landing and hitting us nicely is because these examples are not like our examples. So in our time, we might have a different set of examples where you abandon the literal meaning and you go to kind of like what's the well-known meaning, right? And you're like, yeah, that's of course that's what it means because that's how we use that word.
أم، والثاني قد يترك الحقيقة بدلالة في نفس الكلام.
Okay, so sometimes you abandon the haqiqah due to nafs al-kalam, due to the words or the text or the speech itself. Okay, before we get into this example, because this example is a little bit complicated, let's review slaves. Let's review slaves. So, first of all, we have this one you might want to take notes on because the book's not going to explain this. So, first of all, we have al-abd al-mutlaq. What does the word mutlaq mean? Mutlaq means like generic, right? So, al-abd al-mutlaq is just a generic slave, meaning it includes all types of slaves. It could be this type of slave, that type of slave. All types of slaves are included in. If I just say al-abd, it just means the slave, right? Or al-abd as in like jins, it means like all the different types of slaves. Then you have a few, so that's like the generic statement. But then you have slave categories. One of the categories of slaves is al-mu'taq al-ba'am, right? Al-mu'taq al-ba'am, which is a partially owned slave. So Afraz, if you and I go out and buy a slave together, you pay 50%, I pay 50%. We ended up owning 50%. You own 50% of the slave and I own 50% of the slave, right? Fractional ownership in a slave, joint ownership in a slave. Or maybe we inherited a slave together and now the slave got divided into, 50-50. And so you have 50, I have 50. So that's mu'taq al-ba'am. Then we have a type of a slave called the mukatab, al-mukatab. You guys know what a mukatab is? A mukatab is a type of slave who has been promised freedom in exchange for a certain amount of money. So you say, hey, listen, my slave, I will free you if you give me $100. And the slave says, deal. Let me go work on collecting that $100. It's probably going to take me 6 months. I'm working on it and I'll bring you the $100 and I will be free, right? And I say, yes. So that is a mukatab. It is a slave who has been promised freedom in exchange for some money. Then we have another type of slave, al-mudabbar. Mudabbar. Anyone know what that type of slave is? Mudabbar? The mudabbar is a type of slave that has been promised freedom when the master dies. So if I tell the mudabbar, hey, if I die, you're free. If I tell my slave, if I die, you're free, that's going to become a mudabbar, okay? Then we have another type of slave. So many types. That's ummul walad. Ummul walad. So this is if I have relations with my slave, and then my slave gives birth to a child, then that's going to be ummul walad, okay? So having discussed certain different types of slaves, let's get into this. مثاله
كل مملوك لي فهو حر لم يعتق مكاتبوه ولا من أعتق بعضه إلا إذا نوى دخولهم لأن لفظ المملوك مطلق يتناول المملوك من كل وجه والمكاتب ليس بمملوك من كل وجه ولهذا لم يجز تصرف.
We'll pause there. So someone says, كل مملوك لي فهو حر. All of the slaves that are in my ownership, all of the slaves that I own, فهو حر. Every single one of those slaves is free. Okay? Any slave that I own, that slave is free. Now let me ask you something. If you and I owned a car together, you and I owned a car, I own 50% of it, you own 50% of it. can I say I own that car? By default, what would I say? I would say something like I partially own that car, right? Like I'm not going to say that car is mine. I'm not going to say that. I can't say I own that car. You and I own that car together, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I say all the slaves I own are free, then here it says وَلَا مَنْ أُعْتِقَ بَعْضُهُ, then the one who I partially own is not going to be free because I don't have full ownership over that slave. Similarly, لَمْ يُعْتَقْ مُكَاتَبُهُ, my mukatab slaves are not going to be free because basically when I say mamluk, right, this word mamluk, it means that I have sole ownership and complete ownership. When this word is mutlaq, when I just say mamluk, لِأَنَّ لَفْظَ الْمَمْلُوكِ مُطْلَقٌ, when it's mutlaq by itself, يَتَنَاوَلُ الْمَمْلُوكَ مِنْ كُلِّ وَجْهٍ, it means that I have every type of ownership of the slave, meaning that I have sole and complete ownership. So the problem with the al-mu'taq al-ba'd is I only have fractional ownership, so that slave is not going to get free. Okay? That slave is not going to get free. The problem with the mukatab is I'm the sole owner, but I don't have complete ownership. So for example, with the mukatab, I am not allowed to have intimacy with my mukatab slave. So if I'm not allowed to have intimacy, I don't really have complete ownership. So if I either don't have sole ownership or I don't have complete ownership, then those slaves are not going to be free. So even though I said, كُلُّ مَمْلُوكٍ لِي فَهُوَ حُرٌّ, all of the slaves that I own are free, it's not going to include al-mu'taq al-ba'd. By the way, al-mu'taq al-ba'd, a partially owned slave, you also can't have intimacy with them, right? So you don't really have complete ownership either. So nor do you have sole ownership, nor do you have complete ownership. The mukatab, you may have sole ownership, but you don't have complete ownership. So therefore, these types of slaves would not be free. The mudabbars would be free, the walads would be free, and any other like general type of slave would be free, but the mukatabs and the fractionally owned slaves would not be free. And this is based on the fact that we're looking at the words themselves and what does it mean. But the word mamluk by itself means you have sole and complete ownership. That's what it means as a default. Okay. So we're saying يتناول المملوك من كل وجه, that you have to own it from every single perspective. والمكاتب ليس بمملوك من كل وجه, you don't have ownership over the mukatab from every perspective. ولهذا لم يجوز تصرفه فيه ولا يحل له وطء مكاتبه. So I do not have the right to have intimacy with my mukatab slave. ولو تزوج المكاتب بنت مولاه ثم مات المولى وورثته البنت لم يفسد النكاح. So there's more reasoning why they're not in your complete ownership. وإذا لم يكن مملوكا من كل وجه لا يدخل تحت لفظ المملوك المطلق. So if I just use the word mamluk by itself, they would not be included unless I had made a statement like all of my mukatab slaves are free, all of my fractional owned slaves are free. If I just said owned, it would only include sole and complete ownership. الفرق بين المكاتب والمدبر, you can go ahead and read this, but it's not really very relevant. It's just explaining the difference between the two. Continue.
وهذا بخلاف المدبر وأم الولد فإن الملك فيهما كامل، ولهذا حل وطء المدبرة وأم الولد وإنما النقصان في الرق من حيث أنه يزول بالموت لا محالة. وعلى هذا قلنا لو أعتق المكاتب.
The point that this is opposite the mudabbar and the walad, فإن الملك فيهما كامل. You have complete ownership of them. ولهذا حل وطء المدبرة وأم الولد. That's why you are allowed to have intimacy with those two types of slaves. Okay. وعلى هذا قلنا.
وعلى هذا قلنا لو أعتق المكاتب عن كفارة يمينه أو ظهاره جاز، ولا يجوز فيهما اعتاق المدبر وأم الولد لأن الواجب هو التحرير، وهو إثبات الحرية بإزالة الرق، فإذا كان الرق في المكاتب كاملا كان تحريره تحريرا عن جميع الوجوه، وفي المدبر وأم الولد لما كان الرق ناقصا لا يكون التحرير تحريرا من كل وجوه.
Okay, this is just making a side point that, hey, wait a second. there's some conditions that apply to the mudabbar and the walad. So you don't have complete ownership of them either. Because the mudabbar and the walad, let's say you did like, you broke an oath or you did zihar, right? So you have kafaratul yameen or kafaratul zihar that applies. Can you free a mudabbar? No, you cannot free a mudabbar. Why? Because you already promised them freedom when you die. So you can't like double dip and be like, hey, I'm going to use that for kafara too. Same with walad, is you can't, because walad also gets freedom when the master dies. Okay, so you can't, just like the mudabbar. So you can't be like, oh, I'm going to use this walad for kafara. You can't, because they've already been given freedom. So you're like, wait, I don't have complete ownership of these. No. You do have complete ownership of them. Okay, you do have complete ownership. They will count in the mamluk, but they don't count in kafara because they've already been granted freedom. So you can't double dip and cheat and be like, oh, I'm going to free them, because you've already given them freedom when you're going to die. Okay, so that's what that is. So that's just like a side point. والثالث
والثالث قد يترك الحقيقة بدلالة سياق الكلام.
So sometimes the haqiqah is abandoned based on the context of the speech. And so you have to look, you're not looking at the speech itself, you're looking at the context around it, before it, surrounding it, whatever it is. You're like, hey, based on this context, the words might have a literal meaning, but the literal meaning doesn't apply. Another meaning applies, usually the majazi meaning, right? So
مثاله قال في السير الكبير إذا قال المسلم.
السير الكبير.
Sorry?
What's السير الكبير?
I'm not sure.
One of the 6 books that we said is part of the Zahir al-Riwayah that Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani wrote. Okay, it's one of those 6 books. It's one of the books from Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani.
إذا قال المسلم للحربي انزل فنزل كان آمنا، ولو قال انزل إن كنت رجلا فنزل لا يكون آمنا.
Okay.
ولو
So Imam Muhammad says that a Muslim says to someone they're fighting with, like let's say they're like, I don't know, in a fort or something like that, or they're like hiding out in the mountains, whatever it is, you're just saying, hey, come down, right? And so if you just say, come down, by default, it means come down because stop fighting me, come down, I will give you safety and protection. I'm not going to hit you anymore. Just come down. If all I said is come down, inzil, it means come down and I'm going to give you protection. But if I say, inzil in kunta rajulun, come down if you're a man, well, the context is now telling you that I want to fight you, right? If you're a man, come fight me, right? Why are you hiding back there? Come down and fight me. So even though both of them you're saying, come down, and one of them you said, come down if you're a man, it changed the context completely. So inzil, you're guaranteeing protection. Inzil in kunta rajulan, you're actually threatening them to come down and fight you, and it's the opposite of granting protection. Where do we get this from? The context. You know, come out and fight me if you're a man, right? If you're ready for it. That's how we take the complete opposite meaning. So even though we said come down, like you think like, oh, it's protection? No. It's not. Come down, I'm going to beat you up. Okay, ولو قال الحربي
ولو قال الحربي الأمان الأمان فقال المسلم الأمان الأمان كان آمنا.
Continue.
ولو قال الأمان ستعلم ما تلقى غدا ولا تعجل حتى ترى فنزل لا يكون آمنا.
Okay, so you're fighting with someone and he says al-aman, like protection, like give me protection, give me safety, and then you respond back and you say al-aman. So they asked you al-aman, you responded al-aman, meaning you asked for protection and safety and security, I will give you protection and safety. If instead you responded with al-aman, ستعلم ما تلقى غدا ولا تعجل حتى ترى, like you want protection, you're going to see what happens to you tomorrow, right? Don't hasten to see what's going to happen tomorrow. Like you're going to see what happens to you. So again, so if they said protection, you said protection, it means you're going to grant them protection. But if they say protection, and you say protection, see what I'm going to do to you, right? We'll see what I'm going to do to you. That's the opposite meaning. And so you're not guaranteeing them protection. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. ولو قال
ولو قال اشتري لي جارية لتخدمني فاشترى العمياء أو الشلاء لا يجوز.
Okay. So you ask someone, hey, go like find for me and buy for me a slave girl so that she can serve me. Okay. What were your words? Go find me a slave girl. Not just buy me any slave. Buy me a slave who can serve me. Right? You said اشتري جارية لتخدمني. Someone who can serve me and take care of me. So then this person goes out and gets a blind slave girl, or they get a paralyzed slave girl. You don't owe them the money for that. You're like, hey, look, I asked you for a girl to serve me. Instead, you brought me a blind one. So we're not going to go with the haqiqa meaning of jariyah, which could have been blind, which could have been, paralyzed. Doesn't matter. It's not just any jariyah. We're going to go to haqiqa qasira. It has to be someone who's capable of serving me. She needs to have the qualities to be able to serve me. And then that's what I'm asking for. That's what you need to bring me. ولو
قال اشتري لي جارية حتى أطأها فاشترى أخته من الرضاع لا يكون على الموكل.
Okay, so you ask someone, bring me a slave girl so I can be intimate with her. Again, you're giving very clear context. Bring me a slave girl so I can be intimate with her. Then this person goes off and gets you your sister through breastfeeding. They have not met their end of the bargain. You don't owe them any money because you specifically said, I want to have intimacy with this girl. And they got you your breastfed sister. So they have not met their end of the deal and they didn't understand the context. They missed the dalala of the siyaq and they should have gone from the haqiqa to the haqiqa qasira, but they didn't. They missed it. The meaning would have been the haqiqa qasira, not the haqiqa. Okay,
وعلى هذا قلنا في قوله عليه السلام إذا وقع الذباب في طعام أحدكم فانقلوه ثم انقلوه فإن في إحدى جناحيه داء وفي الأخرى دواء فإنه لا يقدم الداء على الدواء. دل سياق الكلام على أن المقل لدفع الأذى عنا لا لأمر تعبدي حقا للشرع فلا يكون للإجابة.
Okay, so what we're saying is we're talking about the situation with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where it says if a fly falls into your drink, then if one side falls in, dip the other side, and then by default he's saying, hey, you fell on one side, dip the other side. It seems like a command. It seems like if this happens, then do this. Okay, but we're saying فَلَا يَكُونُ لِلْإِجَابِ. This is not wajib. You don't have to, just because the fly fell in your water or your milk or whatever, and one side fell in, you don't have to dip the other side. Why? Because we look at the dalalat al-siyaq. What's going on is the prop دل سياق الكلام على أن المقلة لدفع الأذى عنا لا لأمر تعبدي حقا للشرع. So this is not because the Prophet ﷺ is commanding us, you have to do this. But he was teaching us, hey, look, one side of the fly, one wing has the disease, and one wing has the cure. Now that we know that context, we understand, look, if you want to, he's just explaining one side is this, one side is that. So if you dip the entire fly in the drink, then you can go ahead and drink the drink, no problem. But if you don't do that, it's okay, because based on the dalalat al-siyaq, we understand that this explanation was just for us to understand that there's a disease on one side and a cure on the other side, and this is how you cancel the disease. You don't have to drink it. There isn't wujub, there isn't ijab, and you have to do this. You can choose to do it if you want to. Okay,
وقوله تعالى إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين عقيب قوله تعالى ومنهم من يلمزك في الصدقات يدل على أن ذكر الأصناف لقطع طمعهم من الصدقات لبيان المصارف لها فلا يتوقف الخروج عن العهدة على الأداء إلى الكل.
Okay, so Allah says, indeed, sadaqat, and the word sadaqat here is referring to zakat, of course, للفقراء والمساكين and so on. And so Allah gives 8 categories of the recipients of zakat. So by default, you could take this meaning and say, Allah is listing 8 categories. And if you go with it very literally, from a haqiqah perspective, you would have to give zakat to all of those 8 categories, right? Because Allah saying you have to give zakat to the fuqara, the masakin, the amilina alayha, mu'allaf qulubuhum, all this stuff. Like you have to give it to all these different like 8 categories of people. This is the verse, the famous verse in Surah At-Tawbah, right? So you have to give it to 8 categories of people. Not only that, when Allah says the word lil fuqara, what does fuqara mean?
Poor people.
Okay. How many poor people is it referring to?
Doesn't specify a number.
But it's a plural, right? How many minimum do you need in a plural?
Two or more?
Sorry?
That's 3.
3, right?
Yeah.
So not only is Allah saying you have to give it to 8 categories of people, but in the fuqara category, you have to give it to 3 people because it didn't say faqir, it didn't say faqirani or faqiraini. So you have to give it to 3 faqirs, 3 miskeens, 3 amils, 3, every single category. So now you have to give to at least 24 people in order to take care of your zakat. Because every single one is a plural times 8 categories. So 3 times 8, you have to give to 24 minimum people in order to properly take care of your zakat, right? That's what the haqiqah leads you to believe. That's what the haqiqah leads you to believe. But we know that before this verse, Allah said, وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَلْمِزُكَ فِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. Okay, and so this is a lot like people who are like, kind of like, how do you translate that? That like the hypocrites were basically saying like, oh, like who, they were like complaining about who to give zakat to. And so Allah's clarifying, no. You can give zakat to all of these 8 categories, and faqirs, the faqirs in them, and the miskeens in them, and the amils amongst them, and all this stuff, right? So based on the siyaq, we understand that actually we don't have to give zakat to at least 24 people. We can just give zakat to like one of them or whatever, like whatever we want. Okay. So based on dalalat al-siyaq, we understand that this applies to that these are the people we could give zakat to, not all of the people that we have to give zakat to. Should we move on to the next one?
Sheikh, does the ayah mean that zakah cannot be given to people not mentioned in
Yeah,
this
everybody
ayah?
agrees with that, by the way.
Mm.
Everybody agrees it can only be given to those 8 categories. The problem becomes the last category says, وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. And so what do you do with this category called fi sabilillah? Now, there's a difference of opinion what fi sabilillah means. Amongst the early scholars, fi sabilillah only meant jihadun fi sabilillah, like literally fighting in the way of Allah. So Imam Malik said that there is no difference of opinion. Imam Malik said there's no difference of opinion that fi sabilillah is referring to jihad. And many other scholars made similar statements saying this is clearly jihad. Some of the later scholars, they came and they said, no, fi sabilillah is a broad term. It means anything for the sake of Allah. And therefore, zakat can be given to anything that is a good cause because you're doing it for Allah. And they broadened the category and kind of made it wide open. And now you can give money for absolutely anything. So, Sheikh Farhan, myself, and many of the scholars who kind of follow the scholars of the past, and we believe that fi sabilillah is restricted to jihad, but many of the contemporary scholars have taken the view that it just means anything in the way of Allah. And because our argument is, if Allah really meant to say you can give it for anything, then why didn't he just say fi sabilillah? Why did we have to say innama sadaqatu lil fuqara'i wal masakin? Why did we list out why did Allah list out all these categories? It doesn't make any sense. And why would Imam Malik say that fi sabilillah clearly means jihad? And nobody disagrees on that. So that's our argument. And then other people take the argument as like, no, fi sabilillah just means anything.
She can ask a fiqh question here.
Yeah, you
So,
can certainly try.
in this kind of global environment context that we now live in, so like if you discharge your zakat to an organization that adopts a different opinion, right? So, for example, if they give to fi sabilillah, even if that was not your like you give, you know how they have general zakat funds now, right?
Nope.
So you give zakat and then, they discharge it to whoever they want. And so if they give fi sabilillah, is that still discharged from your obligation, giving you discharge to them?
No, I think so. Number one, when you are giving it to an organization, you have not to an extent you have offloaded responsibility, but it shouldn't be considered a complete offload. That organization is acting as a wakil. That organization is an agent. They're doing a service for you. So if you're ever going to hire someone as an agent on your behalf, particularly if you're going to hire an agent to fulfill one of the pillars of your religion, isn't it your responsibility to make sure that at least they're philosophically aligned with your view of the religion? So if you're going to give charity to an organization to disperse it on your behalf, at the minimum, you should be asking them, hey, is all of my money going to go to zakat, or are you going to keep 30% of it for yourself? What categories are you going to give it to? What causes are you going to give it to? Which countries is it going to go to? How do I know that you've actually given it? Aren't you going to do a little bit? If you are hiring a company that invests money on your behalf, would you just be like, oh, you know what? It seems like a good company, I'm just going to hand it off to them? Or are you going to ask them, by the way, what are you going to invest my funds in? What's the risk that I might lose my money? How much fees do you charge and keep for yourself? How much of my money is actually going to get invested and going to come back to me? You're going to do that due diligence, right? You owe better due diligence that to your zakat. So I don't think you can just completely offload the responsibility. Now, if they lied to you and they cooked the books and they said one thing and did the other thing, that's a different story. You're not responsible for that. That's negligence on their part. That's mishandling on their part. But you got to at least ask them, what are you going to do with the money?
Yeah, and I agree with that. That's what I follow, and I do my best to vet. I think in the time that we live in, the Nislab, say 2,500 or whatever it might be, is technically so low that unless you truly have absolutely nothing, right? Anybody who, at least is in our circles, generally speaking, has enough to at least usually, right? I'm saying the general sense, pay like a month of rent, for example, or something like that. So I've never found an organization yet that goes to that much of an extent to truly verify. Like, of course, you're going to ask questions, right? And then you kind of just leave it to like, do you meet Nisab, or what is the extent of your assets? But it's a little hard to think that, for example, seminaries that we donate to, right? Unless like you're truly have never earned a single penny of your life and you're like reliant on your parents, how would you really meet Nisab in that extent?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. There's an organization in Southern California by the name of Uplift, and
Okay.
they have a pretty tight process, a vetting process, and they do continue to find people who are deserving and worthy of zakat who do not have an Islam. And they do the vetting, like they'll go to the person's house and be like, hey, wait a second, you're asking for charity, but you're wearing a Rolex.
Hmm.
What's going on? Oh, my mother gave me that Rolex, I can never part with that. It has sentimental value to me. Da, 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 da. It's like, sorry, but as long as you have the Rolex, we're not going to help you. Like, you got to
Yeah.
sell it. So, I mean, they're not exactly, I'm sure those aren't the words they're using, but the idea is they do vetting. They'll ask you, what jobs do you have? What can you do? They'll try and help you find a job, and they'll help you develop skills and all this stuff. But they do a very extensive vetting process, and they make sure that you're eligible for zakat. The other thing Uplift does, which a lot of charities don't do, is 100% of the money you give them for zakat goes directly to the recipients. They
Hmm.
don't even keep a dollar of it. They use other funds to fund the zakat, but they make sure all of your funds are going straight to zakat. So there are organizations that do this and they do a pretty good job. The problem is many organizations don't. Many
Yep.
organizations are not transparent. They don't tell you where the money is going. They don't tell you how much they're keeping. And it's really sad. And so I think my goal in life is to try and get every single organization to be very transparent with where the zakat money is going.
Makes sense.
And then people can decide, whoever you want to give to, you give to. But at least the organization should tell you where the money is going. And then they take zakat money. You can find some of these articles in Muslim Matters. They'll take zakat money and they'll spend it on a speaker to pay a speaker $30,000 to come and speak at an event and do entertainment on a stage or something like that. Like, oh yeah, we're doing this for a fundraiser. But it's like, wait a second, where's that in the 8 categories of zakat? It's not. They're like, oh, it's what I'm eating. It's like, no, I don't believe that. Because you as like Uplift as an organization, or Islamic Relief as an organization, or Hidayah, or whatever, Ikna Relief, whatever, these organizations, they're my agent. I'm trying to pay zakat and they're helping me out. I don't consider them agents of the needy. I consider them agents for me to help me pay zakat. So when they're inviting an entertainer and paying all this money and putting them in a 7-star hotel and all this stuff, I don't believe that's what zakat money was supposed to be for. I don't consider that to be one of the 8 categories. So I find those things very problematic. I'm pretty hardcore on the issue of zakat, and reason being that, number one reason being that when you have your 5 pillars of Islam, you don't mess with the pillars, man. Like, don't mess with the pillars. You can, it'll shake down the entire building. It'll destroy everything. And so when it comes to salah, saum, zakah, shahada, hajj, don't mess around. This is serious business. And that's kind of the view that I take, is not that I'm trying to be like unnecessarily harsh or strict about it, but that we have to not be trying to find tricks and techniques and mechanisms to play around with zakat. Maybe that's where you can use your extra sadaqah funds for, but we don't mess with zakat is sort of my policy.
I agree, and that makes sense. I think the approach that I've taken so far is it's not malintent, right? Like there definitely are zakat organizations that just don't know what they're doing, but there are, I found even amongst very credible, even seminaries, even I wouldn't say masajid, I'm talking about ones run by ulama. Like there's details around, for example, card processing fees, transaction fees. They
Yeah.
just don't know about. Like some of them will say, "Do you want to cover it?" Some of them don't even mention it and give you an option. And so I kind of will do my due diligence to the best part and then make an intention of continued sadaqah throughout the year to
Yeah.
cover any
Yeah.
flaws. You'll never know,
Yeah.
right?
And by the way, these issues have been discussed, right? So personally, I'd love to get credit card points and pay my zakat through credit card, and get like airline status and all that good stuff. But the challenge is, if I pay with a credit card $100 zakat, we know that some percentage of that is going to pay the credit card processing fees, and it never made it to the recipient. And these issues have been discussed. Imam Nawawi talks about that issue, for example, in his book. And this is one place that I've looked it up. And so he discusses, he says, if you are trying to provide zakat to, let's say, like I need to send zakat to Canada, okay, because I'm sending it to my family over there, like my cousin, okay? So I'm sending zakat to my cousin in Canada. The transportation cost for me to get that zakat to Canada is on me, and it doesn't count as part of zakat. So to me, that's very clear that the credit card processing fees is just like the transportation cost for me to get the money from here to the next village or whatever it might be. So these are not like new issues. These issues have been discussed, but you're right. People don't pay careful attention to them, so they don't even think about the credit. Neither the receiver neither the organization that's collecting nor the person that's giving thinks about the credit card fees. But the credit card fees are really your problem because you're the one who owes zakat. So you need to make sure that the organization you're giving to is you are proper about it and they're proper about it, right? And so, yeah.
Yeah, like sometimes it's just not an option, right? Like, so it's not even about credit card or not, whether you do ACH, debit, like sometimes they use donor box or sometimes they use something else where like there is no other medium other than mailing a check, which they do not accept. So,
Yeah, no. So, but then you ask them, right? You call them up, and so every organization I give zakat to, I am talking to a human being, and I'm asking them questions. Wait, how do you take the money? Is there any transfer fee? What percent do you keep for yourself? What percent do you give? And that's why I'm happy to endorse Uplift. I have no relationship with Uplift, but I'm happy to endorse them because they take 100% of the money and they pass it on to the recipient.
Makes sense. Exactly.
Okay, let's end here. We weren't able to finish the chapter, but we're not that far away. We will continue next week, inshallah. Okay, سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم.
Thank you.
عليكم السلام.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. All right, let's get started. So, we finished Surah Hujurat yesterday, so starting in Surah, we'll finish off the Fatima, the last 3 sections today, and over next week, no class. I'll post on the WhatsApp group what you have to study for the finals, inshallah, so you can get started on reviewing. And for Saturday's class, there won't be a live class, but there will be a recording posted. It's about an hour long, just over an hour. It goes over the Ijaz al-Hadf in a word, Ijaz fil lafz, basically, the Hazf fil lafz, the dropping of certain letters in certain words. So it completes the chapter of Ijaz, because we're going to be not having class for the next 3 Saturdays. Inshallah, next Saturday I'll be flying, so won't be able to have class in the morning. And then 20th and the 4th, we have winter break. So we'll be resuming classes on the 11th, but that'll just be for 1 Saturday. And the 18th is part of the long weekend, so we don't have class then either. Okay. All right, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. فصل التأكيد, and this is on page 162. So فصل التأكيد تابع يدل على تقرير المتبوع فيما نسب إليه أو على شمول الحكم لكل فرد من أفراد المتبوع. So تأكيد is a tabir which indicates upon a matbur, which affirms a matbur or emphasizes the matbur, فيما نسب إليه, that which is connected to it, أو على شمول الحكم, or it is comprised or it's included in the hukm of it, right? It's included in the hukm of it. لكل فرد من أفراد المتبوع, for every part of the matbur. Okay, essentially everything that follows the matbur is emphasizing, every tabir is emphasizing its connection to the matbur. القسمان للتأكيد والتأكيد على قسمين لفظي معنوي. قسمان, so تأكيد is of 2 types, لفظي and معنوي. القسم الأول لفظي وهو تكرير اللفظ الأول. The تأكيد لفظي is the repetition of the first word. نحو, example, جاءني زيد زيد وجاء جاء زيد. القسم الثاني, the second type, ومعنوي, توكيد معنوي, وهو بألفاظ متعددة. It is by a selected few words. In other words, you give the emphasis through these words. وهي النفس والعين للواحد والمثنى والمجموع باختلاف الصيغة والضمير. And you do the تأكيد معنوي with the words النفس and العين for the singular, for the dual, for the plural, by the different sighas and dhamirs. In other words, you change their form to reflect singular, dual, or plural. نحو, for example, جاءني زيد نفسه. Right? Zayd himself came. جاءني زيدان أنفسهما, or نفساهما, or جاءني زيدون أنفسهم. وكذلك جاءني زيد عينه, or جاءني زيدان أعينهما or عيناهما, or جاءني زيدون أعينهم. Okay? And you do that for the feminine also. جاءتني هند نفسها, جاءتني هندان أنفسهما or نفساهما, or جاءتني الهندات أنفسهن. All right, so that changes just on the ضمير to reflect, you know, واحد تثنية جمع مذكر مؤنث. Right? So alongside nafsun and aynun, you also have the words kila and kilta. Now, kila and kilta, wakila wa kilta lilmuthanna khasatan. These two words are specifically for the tathniya words. For example, قام الرجلان كلاهما, and قامت المرأتان كلتاهما. So kila is for mudhakkar, kilta is for muannath, and they only come for tathniya words. And alongside these four words, you have the other ones, kullu wa kullu ajma'u abta'u abta'u absa'u. We came across these in Tuhfa as well. وكل وأجمع وأبتع وأبتع وأبصع لغير المثنى باختلاف الضمير. Now they come لغير المثنى. They come for other than the tathniya. In other words, they come for the wahid, they come for the singular, and they come for the plural. Okay? And that is indicated by the changing of the dhamir in the word kullu and wasighatu, and that is indicated by the changing of the sigha in the other words. In other words, kulluhu or kulluhum or kulluha or kulluhunna. That's ikhtilaf al-dhamir, changing of the dhamir. And ajma'u, abta'u, abta'u, absa'u, the changing of the sigha is ajma'u versus ajma'una. Akta'u, abta'u, absa'u versus akta'una, abta'una, absa'una. So that's what we mean by changing of the sigha. So in kullu, we know it through the changing of the dhamir, and in ajma'u, akta'u, abta'u, absa'u, that comes by the changing of the sigha. تقول, for example, you would say جاءني القوم كلهم أجمعون أبتعون أبتعون أبصعون. And if you remember from Tuhfa, they mentioned that أبتعون أبتعون or أبصعون or أبتعوا أبتعوا أبصعوا, all three have to come together. All right, you mention all three together, or you don't mention them at all. You can also say قامت النساء كلهن جمعوا كتعوا بتعوا بصعوا. That's for the jama' mu'annath forms, right? And ajma'una, akta'una, absa'una, abta'una is for jama' mudhakkar. I'm reading through it because, again, these are self-explanatory. We came across them already last year, right? وإذا أردت تأكيد الضمير المرفوع المتصل. When you intend to emphasize a ضمير مرفوع متصل, like the word أنت, for example, then when you intend to emphasize a ضمير مرفوع متصل with the word النفس and عين, بالنفس والعين, يجب تأكيده بالضمير المنفصل. Then it is necessary for you to emphasize it by the ضمير منفصل of that ضمير متصل. So for example, if you want to say ضربت نفسك, like I hit you, ضربت نفسك, I hit you specifically, then when you want to emphasize the ka, basically, which is the ضمير مرفوع متصل, if you want to emphasize the ka, then you have to emphasize it with its ضمير مرفوع منفصل. So you have to use the أنت. So basically, ضربت أنت نفسك. Right? And that's going to change based on whoever you are talking about. Right? If you want to say, I hit him specifically, then it'll be ضربت هو نفسه. ضربت هو نفسه. Right? Okay. ولا يؤكد بكل وأجمع إلا ما له أجزاء وأبعاد يصح افتراقها حسا. And you cannot emphasize with the words كل and أجمع except for the things that have parts and pieces, أجزاء وأبعاد, that have parts and pieces which are correct, or يصح, which are possible to separate. حسا, like literally, like the word قوم. So a qawm, a group, is comprised of peoples, and those peoples can literally be separated from each other. So that's literal separation. افتراقها حسا أو حكما كما تقول اشتريت العبد كله. Right? Or this separation is a figure of speech, حكما. Okay? For example, I purchased the entire slave. In other words, I purchased ownership of the entire slave. Okay? Because ownership could be split between, for example, multiple peoples, right? And you wouldn't say, for example, أكرمت العبد كله. You're not going to say, I honored the slave completely. Because أكرمت can only apply to the entirety of something. So you could only emphasize the things that can either be, you can only emphasize with kullun and ajma'u the things that could either be literally separated, so they have parts and pieces, so you use kullu and ajma'u to mean all of it, or the things that can be, as a figure of speech, or in another sense can be separated, like ownership, which could be 50-50, 75-25, and so on. But you will not use kullun and ajma'u with things that cannot be separated. So concepts like honoring, because you can't honor and dishonor someone at the same time, or you can't honor part of a person and dishonor another part of a person, right? Okay. واعلم, and know, أن أكتع أبتع أبصع أتباع لأجمع. أكتع أبتع أبصع are followers of أجمع. وليس لها معنى ها هنا بدونه, and these do not have any meanings here without the word أجمع. فلا يجوز تقديمها على أجمع. They cannot be bought before the word أجمع. In other words, you cannot mention أجمع at the end of a sentence. After these three words, they have to be mentioned before these three words. ولا ذكرها بدونها. And you cannot mention these three words, أكتع أبتع أبصع, without the word أجمع, because they only make sense when they come alongside the word أجمع. And also all three have to be mentioned alongside أجمع. You can't choose one or two of them to mention. All right. Any questions? Okay. So the next tab here is badal. Tafsilul badal. Badal, basically substitute. We did this in Tuhfa also. Badal can come in many different ways. Faslun, tafsilul badli, faslun al-badlu, tabi'un, ينسب إليه ما نسب إلى متبوعه وهو المقصود بالنسبة دون متبوعه. The badal is a tabir. The badal is a tabir where the link to it is the same link to the matbu'. It is a link, whatever the badal is a tabir where the link to it is the same link to the matbu'. وهو المقصود بالنسبة, and it is the intended part of the sentence. وهو المقصود, it is the intended part of the sentence. بالنسبة, because of this connection, because of this tabir matbu' connection, and not the matbu' itself. Okay. Simply means that when it comes to the badal, the word that is replacing the word is the main part of the sentence, right? So it's a substitute, and that's the main focus of the sentence. And obviously we have the badal, and the mubdal minhu is the matbu'. So the mubdal minhu, which comes first, is the matbu', and the badal is the tabir. أقسام البدل وأقسام البدل أربعة. The types of badal are four. بدل الكل من الكل وهو ما مدلوله مدلول المتبوع نحو جاءني زيد أخوك. So badal kul min al kul is when the intended, and we'll go through the table for this. The first one, when the intended of badal is exactly the same of the matbu'. So the madlul, the intended of the tabir, is the intended of the matbu'. In other words, both words are referring to the same thing. Ja'ani Zaydun akhuka. So Zayd came to me, your brother. So whether you say Ja'ani Zaydun or you say Ja'ani akhuka, they mean exactly the same thing because they're one and the same person, right? وَبَدْلُ الْبَعْضِ مِنَ الْكُلِّ. And then you have the badal of some from the kul, so a little from the whole. So وَهُوَ مَا مَدْلُولُهُ. So the indication or the intended of the tabir is جُزْءُ مَدْلُولِ الْمَتْبُوعِ. The intended of the tabir, the intended of the badal is part of the intended of the matbu'. So it's not the same thing. So it's not exactly the same thing, but it's part of it. So ضربت زيدا رأسه. I hit Zayd his head. Right? You could reword this as ضربت رأس زيد. I hit Zayd's head. Right? So when you say ضربت زيدا and you say رأسه, what you mean to say is I hit Zayd, but I hit Zayd's head, which is part of Zayd. Okay, so that's badal ba'd min al-kull. So what you intend by the word ra'sun, ma madluluhu, what you intend by the tabir is juz'un, is part of madlulul matbu', is part of what the matbu' is indicating. And that is Zayd as an entire person. Okay. وبدل الاشتمال وهو ما مدلوله متعلق المتبوع نحو سلب زيد ثوبه. So badal ishtimal is when the intended of the tabir is connected to the intended of the matbu'. When the intended of the tabir is connected to the intended of the matbu'. For example, Zayd's clothes were stolen. Suliba Zaydun thawbuhu. Zayd's clothes were stolen. So in this example, the word thawbuhu is the badal, which is connected to the word which is mentioned as the mubdal minhu, and that is the word Zayd. So Zayd's clothes are connected to Zayd. Right? And the last one is badal ghalat, which is وَهُوَ مَا يُذْكَرُ بَعْدَ الْغَلَط. Badal ghalat is when you misspeak and you correct your mistake. So the second word is the one you actually intended to say and not the first word. In Tuhfa, if you remember, badal ghalat had like some subtypes, but they all more or less mean the same thing, right? Nahu ja'ani Zaydun Ja'far. That Zayd came to me. No, it's Ja'far, right? So you actually intended to say Ja'far, but you mistakenly said Zayd. Or you thought it was Zayd at a distance, so that's what you said, but when you saw it closely, you said, oh no, it's Ja'far. Or رأيت رجلا حمارا. You looked in the distance, you saw a silhouette and you thought it was a person, but as it came closer, you saw it was a donkey. So when you said the word himar, that's what you actually mean, right? And it's replacing the word rajul. So that's badal ghalat. Okay. And the rule of a badal is very simple. حكم البدل والبدل إن كان نكرة من معرفة. The badal, if it is a nakira of a ma'rifa word, meaning of a mubdal minhu, which is ma'rifa, يجب نعته, then it is necessary for you to bring a sifa of that badal. So the badal is nakira and it is of a ma'rifa word, then the badal itself needs to have a sifa. So it'll become a mawsuf sifa before it becomes the badal. For example, كقوله تعالى بالناصية ناصية كاذبة خاطئة. So in Surah Alaq, right? Allah says, لنسفعا بالناصية, that we will grab them by their forelock. Nasiya, bin nasiya. So this bin nasiya is a mubdal minhu, and then the ayah after it, nasiyatin kadibatin khati'a, is obviously mawsuf sifa sifa, but all of it becomes the badal of the word nasiya. Okay, so nasiyatin is a nakira badal of a ma'rifa mubdal minhu bin nasiya. As a result, nasiyatin has to have a sifa, and in the ayah it has two, kadibatin khati'atin. Okay. However, sorry.
I just had a question.
Yeah.
How do you differentiate between تأكيد and بدل البعض من الكل? So in the example for تأكيد it says جاءني زيد عينه, and this بدل is ضربت زيدا رأسه. They sound kind of similar.
Between تأكيد and بدل بعض من الكل, or
Yeah.
من الكل?
No, بعض من الكل. In the table, the second example.
Yeah. Contrast with which example?
On page 164 on the first table, جاءني زيد عينه.
جاءني زيد عينه, right? So عينه there doesn't mean ayn, obviously, right? That ayn means it's a synonym of the word nafs. You translate that as Zayd himself came, or only Zayd came, right? So the way to tell them apart, or to figure out if a badal, if a word is actually badal and the word before it is a mubdal minhu, is to simply reread the sentence without the first word. So if you say ضربت رأسه and you say ضربت زيدا رأسه, then you clearly see رأسه being a part of the word Zayd.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. And also in terms of i'rab, رأسه is well, in i'rab it doesn't matter because it's following the word before it. But if you were to reread it and switch one word with the other, would you still get that meaning, or would you get a badal meaning essentially? So yeah. Make sense?
Yes.
ولا يجب ذلك في عكسه في المتجانسين. This is not permitted in the opposite. Opposite means when the mubdal minhu is nakira and the badal is ma'rifa. When the mubdal minhu is nakira and the badal is ma'rifa, then it is not possible. ولا في المتجانسين. And it is not possible when you have two jins of something. In other words, you cannot have this between a muddal minhu, which is from one species or a category, and a badal, which is of another category. Right. The last of the tabi' is called Atful Bayan. Now, in Tuhfa, Atf, the Atf as we know it, and Atful Bayan was, if I'm not mistaken, part of the same chapter, part of the same section. Here, they do make a distinction. But it's a tabi', right? So this is the last of the tabi' for Asma'ul Mu'arabat. تفصيل عطف البيان فصل عطف البيان تابع غير صفة يوضح مطبوعه وهو أشهر اسمي شيء. Okay, so عطف بيان is the tabi' which is not a sifa, right? عطف بيان is the tabi' which follows a word. It's not a sifa, and its purpose يوضح مطبوعه. It clarifies, it makes clear the matbu'. And how does it do so? وَهُوَ أَشْهَرُ إِسْمَيْ شَيْءٍ. It clarifies by mentioning the more popular or the more well-known name of two names of something. إِسْمَيْ شَيْءٍ. Okay? So basically, if a thing or a person has two names, then Atf Bayan would be the more well-known common name or moniker or label of something. So for example, Qama Abu Hafs Umar. Abu Hafs stood, meaning Umar stood. So Umar is the more well-known name of Abu Hafs. So this is the tabi' that follows Abu Hafs, which is the matbu', and it clarifies Abu Hafs more, because now it's fashionable for many people to have these names, obviously as part of their social media, Abu this or that. Sometimes is out of sometimes is because they want to remain semi-anonymous, right? So they're something or Abu something because they don't want to get backlash, because they're usually the ones that cause a lot of problems online, right? Or otherwise, sometimes it's like people that want to be Arab very badly, right? So they're like, Abu this, Abu that, and it'll be part of their, Facebook name or whatever. Or, it's sometimes out of false modesty, etc., etc. Right? Like the denizens of online are their own species, right? And we're part of that. But you have a ton of Abu Maryams, for example. Like every other person is Abu Maryam. So which Abu Maryam are you talking about? Then you mention their actual name, and they're like, oh, that Abu Maryam. Okay. Waqama Abdullah ibn Umar, right? Because there are many Abdullahs. So which Abdullah are we talking about? Is Ibn Umar, right? The son of Umar, who is also Abdullah, right? So the matbur is the name that's not well known. The tabi' is the name that is well known. That's the purpose of Atf Bayan. Now, what's the difference between Atf Bayan and Badal? Because it sounds exactly the same. If I say, Ja'ani Zaydun Abu Maryam, right? Ja'ani Zaydun Abu Maryam, or I'll say Abu Isa because my son is Isa, right? Ja'ani Zaydun Abu Isa. That sounds exactly identical by saying Ja'ani Abu Isa Zaydun. Does that make sense? Like, what's the difference between Atf Bayan and Badal then? Because it sounds almost exactly the same. So the difference, other than the fact that it's obviously being switched, because in Badal, they are switchable. So if I say Ja'ani, if you say Ja'ani Zaydun Abu Isa, Zayd and Abu Isa are switchable with each other because it's talking about the same exact person. However, that does not clarify to you, or it doesn't clarify to you which Abu Isa it is if you don't mention the word Zayd. Because if you say Ja'ani Abu Isa or Ja'ani Zaydun, you're talking about the same person. But if you were to say Ja'ani Abu Isa, less people might know that versus Ja'ani Zaydun. So when you say Ja'ani Abu Isa Zaydun, that Abu Isa came, which is Zayd, then that is more atf bayan because you are mentioning the less known name first and then the more well-known name second. Okay. So الفرق بين عطف البيان والبدل, there is a difference between the عطف bayan and the badal. ولا يلتبس بالبدل, and do not confuse it with badal. لفظا, and do not confuse it do not confuse it with the badal in wording. For example, the poem of a shair, أنا ابن التارك البكري بشر عليه الطير ترقبه وقوعا. So in badal, so let's read through footnote 425, 6 and 7. So what's the difference between badal and atf bayan? In the badal, it itself is the intended and not the mubdal minhu, right? So when you say Ja'ani Zaydun akhuka, then the badal akhuka is the intended, Zaydun is not. Whereas in the atf bayan, the word that is the tabir is not intended itself, but the intended is the matbu'. So when you say, Ja'ani Zaydun Abu Isa, or Ja'ani Abu Isa Zaydun, then the atf bayan Zaydun is just there to clarify the word Abu Isa further. Okay. So one example is given of this poem, which is translated as Ana ibn Tariq, I am the son of the person who left. I am the son of the person, At-Tariq, who left Al-Bakri, Bakr, who left Bakr Bishr, alayhi, who left Bakr Bishr in a way, alayhi Tayru, in such a situation that the birds were upon him, tarqubuhu wuqu'a, waiting for his soul to be removed. In other words, I beat him up so bad and I left him in a situation where he was dying and the birds were waiting to eat him, the vultures were waiting to eat him because his soul was going to be removed. In other words, he was going to die. Right? Okay. So in this example, in 427 footnote, in this poem, the word Bishr has to be the atf bayan of the word Bakri, which is the matbu'. If the word Bishr is taken as the badal of the matbu' of the word Bakri, then the sentence will become Ana ibn Tariki Bishrin, as the badal is the intended in the structure and not the mubdal min. Now, if you take it as badal, then the word Tariq will be mudaf and the word Bishr will be mudaf ilayh. And then there's the rule that the mudaf can never have an alif lam if it is singular and the word after it does not have alif lam before it. It's just, something that they go into, like, okay, if you were to think through one being badal versus atf bayan, then grammatically speaking, the poem only makes sense if you were to consider it as badal and not atf bayan because of XYZ reason. So we don't have to worry about it, right? The only difference that you have to remember is that in badal mubdal minhu, the badal is the intended part of the sentence, right? And in atf bayan, the tabi', which is the atf bayan, is not the intended part of the sentence. It's simply there to clarify it further, right? Okay. That brings us to the end of الباب الأول في الاسم المبني. And I had mentioned to you all that الباب الثاني في الاسم المبني starts from page 23. So page 23 is after the introduction of the book, where we talked about kalima, kalam, nahu, the subject of nahu, benefit of nahu, so on and so forth. All of that was the introduction. Page 23 was al-qism al-awwal fil ism, which is the first body chapter of the book. And in al-qism al-awwal fil ismi, you have two babs, right? وهو, in the first line it said, وهو ينقسم إلى المعرب والمبني. That ism is divided into mu'rab and mabni. And we will talk about mu'rab and mabni and its rules in 2 chapters and a khatima. So the first chapter was al-bab al-awwal fil ism al-mu'rab. Al-bab al-awwal fil ism al-mu'rab. And then in al-bab al-awwal fil ism al-mu'rab, there was fihi muqaddimah. There was a muqaddimah in which where we talked about the i'rabs and munsarif and ghayr munsarif. And then we talked about thalathatu maqasid, which were the marfu'at, mansubat, and majrurat chapters, wa khatimah, and the conclusion, which is what we just completed. That, all of it, from page 23 up until page 169, was al-bab al-awwal fil ism al-mu'rab. And then from page 170 is al-bab al-thani fil ism al-mabni, which is the second type of asma, right? Which is the second type of asma. And this is going to continue until page 206. So al-bab al-thani fil ism al-mabni is going to finish on page 206, and then this chapter has its own khatimah. Right? This chapter has its own khatimah, which is going to continue and conclude on page 246. So the khatimah is about 40-ish pages. And then from page 246 is al-qism al-thani fil fi'l. That's where the first body chapter of the book completes, and the first body chapter is ism, divided into the fil ism al-mu'rab and fil ism al-mabni, right? And then after al-qism al-thani, you have al-qism al-thalith, which is with regards to the harf. Right, so we're pretty much halfway through the book. Entire book is like 300 something pages. So if we ease up a little bit, for Hidayat al-Nahu will still be fine, inshallah. But the goal is to hopefully finish it before Ramadan. Before Ramadan, as in before Ramadan finishes, before the Eid break. But we'll see, inshallah. We'll probably focus more on Jalalain in Ramadan anyway. Because Ramadan is earlier this year, we'll have more time after Ramadan to finish by the finals in May, inshallah. And if we have extra time, we will just go through different books of tafsir, just like different sections and ayat, kind of look through different tafsir as a supplement, inshallah. Right? So next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I'll be online, but we won't cover any new material. And on Monday, inshallah, I'll let you all know what to start reviewing for your finals, inshallah. Right? And the finals are first week back after winter break. Right. Any questions? جزاك الله. سبحان الله وبحمده. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
عليكم السلام.